Evil never sleeps. Welcome back. Study of the book of Judges. I just want to start with an apology. If you've been with us for our studies, and especially if you were with us last time, we were in Judges chapter 3, I believe it is verses 12 through 30. I want to apologize because I dropped the ball. I felt rushed. I went through it way too quickly. I didn't edit. And I know that I just put it online without even proofreading it, if you will. I just published my work without proofreading, and you deserve better. So I apologize. Even if no one's watching these videos, if you're going to do anything in life, take time to do it well. Otherwise, what's the point? I mean, carpenters out there will know what I'm talking about. Measure twice, cut once, right? And I think that's probably that's more than half of what's wrong with the world today. Is people don't care. We're apathetic. We're lethargic. Okay, we don't take pride in our workmanship anymore, and that's pathetic. And with that being said, I owe you an apology. I owe you an apology because my work last time was pathetic. You deserve better. The Lord deserves better. So while we're doing the study of the book of Judges, I hope you'll forgive me, and I hope that you went through and kept reading yourself and looked into there, because I know for a fact I left a lot of stuff out. And I threw some stuff in there that I imagine you probably thought of yourself before, and for that, it might have been worth watching the video. And if you didn't, you probably didn't miss much, although I did draw some stuff out of there that most churches don't. I did leave a lot of stuff out for the sake of time. I wanted to rush and get it done before I kept going with what I had. And I just feel rushed because time is precious. There's not enough of it. So, again, that being said, I just want to throw the apology out there and get that done and out of the way, because last week was pathetic, and evil never sleeps. Someone much better than I once said, the only way that evil will progress is if good men do nothing. It was a loose paraphrase. And I look at the world today, you can see it. It's not good. We're going to be talking about that a little bit today. How evil never sleeps. Knowing that, we just got to be more. We got to be more steadfast in our resolve. We got to try harder. We got to pray harder. We got to read more. We got to fight back. And our warfare is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, mindsets, worldviews, opinions. And with that being said, the Christians are supposed to speak the truth in love, but no, we're quiet. And whenever we say something that people get offended by, then of course they're going to play that politically correct trump card, and it's just crazy. It's crazy. But I digress. I just want to, again, I apologize for last week. We're going to look at the Bible today. We're only going to look at a couple verses. We're going to pick it up where we left off last week. Last week we looked at Ehud and Eglon and what happened there. It's very interesting, and maybe you should, if you haven't already, maybe you should go back and look at what we talked about, what we read. Maybe just read it yourself. But I do want to remind you, notice that nowhere did it say that the Lord was with Ehud. It doesn't say now the Spirit of the Lord fell upon Ehud and said, do this, do that, do whatever. Whereas we see that the Spirit, that God, that, however, the Lord, the Spirit, however you want to identify the creating sovereign of the universe, he was with Joshua, he was with Moses, he was with Othniel, he was with, Judah, and so on and so forth. And here we are in the beginning of the book of Judges, and now we're seeing that, it didn't say so much with Ehud. And now here we are in Judges chapter 3. Going to look at verse 31. We're going to start with the end, if you will. the last verse of Judges chapter 3. It is verse 31. And I'm reading from the New King James Version. It says, "After him was Shamgar, the son of Anath, who killed 600 men of the Philistines with an ox goad, and he also delivered Israel." Where's the Lord? I'm just saying, where's God in this deal? I mean, it doesn't say that the Lord was with Shamgar, like it was silent about Ehud. It didn't say that the Lord was with Ehud. He was with Othniel. He was with Joshua. He was with the tribe of Judah. Pay attention. All right? Notice that. Remember this. We're looking, I mean, this is very obscure. You only see one verse about Shamgar, but I think we should make notice that it doesn't say that the Lord was with him. Just that he was a pretty bad dude, killed a lot of guys, and he also delivered Israel. Last week we looked how Ehud, presumably, working out of the flesh, the Lord wasn't with him. It doesn't say so, so I'm going to assume that he wasn't. How Ehud pretty much with deceit assassinated a guy, but how the Lord used that for, to help out Israel. He delivered Israel by, we talked about that last week. Perhaps that theme is following through with Shamgar. I don't know. All I know is what I see in verse 31. It says, "After him was Shamgar, the son of Anath, who killed 600 men of the Philistines with an ox goad, and he also delivered Israel." Now, allow me to share with you this is just my observation. This is just my own way of thinking. And I often say, I color outside of the lines. I think outside of the box. Be it for the better or for the worse, just humor me with today. For as we look at this, maybe I can perhaps make you think for yourselves too, and maybe we can get something out of this. I do know that the name Shamgar in Judges 3:31, his reference number in your Strong's Concordance is 8044. 8044. You can go ahead and look that up, but you're going to be disappointed because there's nothing there. It doesn't talk about Shamgar. All it says is about Shamgar in the Strong's Concordance. You'll flip that open, it'll say, "Refer to the Knave's Topical Reference System." Most people wouldn't do that. I did that for you. So I looked up the Knave's Topical Reference System, which simply stated, and I quote, Shamgar, the pagan Hurrian god Shinki gave a son, the son of Anath, semicolon, judge, semicolon, killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad, period, end of quote. That's all we see about Shamgar from your typical, biblical sources. But Herbert Lockyer writes in his book, All the Men of the Bible, he says, and I quote, he just gave the name, he just did the homework for us because we really have no other sources at this point. So he looks up Shamgar, and he says that his name simply means cupbearer, or a surprised stranger. And he looked up the father, remember, Anath, Shamgar's dad. His name, Anath, means answer or a granting. That's according to Herbert Lockyer. Now, number one, you're probably saying, well, what's the big deal about the last couple of weeks you're doing word studies? Boring. And all you're doing is talking about names. Boring. Well, probably for Americans it is. Boring, right? But back in the day, especially, in the American culture, names don't mean anything. But back in the day, well, maybe more so for Native American Indians, they would name their children with the sites of the day that the kid was born. Like, okay, maybe a son was born to Chief Wild Oats, and looked out the tent and saw a running bear, a bear running either to or fro. So he names his son Running Bear. The name meant something, right? Go back further in time. it was more, life was more spiritual back in the day. In the Hebrew culture for sure, names pretty much, it almost seems as if the Hebrew race, the Israelites, the Semites, didn't get their name until they were like 75 years old. Where the person can, the mom and dad can watch and perceive and see what type of person their child turned out to be, and then give them their name. Because it always seems that the names that they're given pretty much dictates, not like a note, letter by letter, but in theme, in general overview, their name dictated what type of person they would be or what they would do. I think we started talking about that a couple of weeks ago, and for sure we'll be looking at that more in the future, but just for now, pay attention, okay? Realize that. That's why we're doing name studies, because it actually means something for them. So it means, it should, and I hope it does, mean something for us today as we're doing a study. So, having said all that, again, the name Shamgar means cupbearer or a surprised stranger. Where Anath, the father's name, meant answer or a granting. Now, not a lot is known of Shamgar from biblical sources, but with this commentary, this expounding, this homework, or whatever you want to call it, one may reasonably infer, and I know I did because I wrote this down, I wrote, perhaps, and this is just my perspective, this is what I'm thinking. Having a hard time talking today. I hope you can follow along anyways, and if I spit on you, I'm sorry. Okay, anyways, perhaps Anath, or Anath, being an apostate Israeli, worshipped one of the many demonic beings known as gods in his day. Perhaps, and only perhaps, Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. Perhaps he, again, used what was intended for evil and used it for the good of Israel. You looked at that a little bit last week. We talked about it from time to time so far, and I'm sure we're going to dwell on this in some future study. But for now, just imagine, if you will, presume that maybe, and it's just a possibility that God could have used let's presume, because we know that Israel goes from apostasy, we've read it all throughout the book so far, how Israel served the Baals and the Ashtoreths. Perhaps Dad, Anath, is one of those guys. Maybe he's praying to a demonic being known as Asherah, Baals, the false idols. Maybe he was praying to one of them, and then by some coincidence he has a son. Maybe there's more to it, because Anath's name means an answer or a granting. Maybe, it just was meant to be that, Anath is going to turn out to be an apostate Israeli, and he's worshiping a Baal, and his son is barren, and his wife is barren. And just by, some stroke of luck, maybe it was even the milkman showed up one day. Maybe it was his fault and not hers, but who knows? By some stroke of genius, by some coincidence, and this is just, I'm just thinking out loud. Maybe this is just me thinking, okay? Because the Bible is silent. But perhaps Anath makes a deal with the devil, and he gets an answer, a granting of a wish, if you will. He gets a son, and his son's name is Shamgar. And his name means cupbearer. Do a word study. Find out what a cupbearer was and what they did. Interesting to note, and this is not in my notes, it just came to my head like out of the clear blue. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Daniel a cupbearer to one of the guys at one point? Somebody. It wasn't Daniel. I think it was Jeremiah or Nehemiah. It was one of the minor prophets. Maybe it was Jeremiah. Maybe it was Nehemiah. Anyways, it was one of the... That's neither here nor there. But the names do mean something. And Shamgar means a surprised stranger. hopefully we'll come around in full circle and tie that off in a nice little bow, and it'll make sense then. But again, I remind you, evil never sleeps, okay? Remember that. So Shamgar's name means a surprise stranger, but, and this is just my own funny way of thinking, because very little, if anything, is known of Anath or Shamgar. But I would think that if God moved in and through Shamgar for his purposes, for his glory, it would be recorded for our benefit. Nowhere did we see in that one little verse of Shamgar that the Lord was with Shamgar. Right? And again, this brings us back to the interpretive challenges here of our book of Judges study. And we looked at this in the overview. And somewhere along in chapter 2, we reiterated, we revisited these interpretive challenges. And I think that right here, what we're going to be looking at today will cover 3 of the 4 interpretive challenges that we identified. Number 1 was how do we apply the book of Judges to daily living? We talked about similarities, and again, I remind you, just because things are similar doesn't mean they're the same. And there's a lot of striking similarities between the Old Testament Israel and the New Testament church. Another interpretive challenge was, and here we go, the next 3 I think applies to what we're looking at today. Number 2 was how to view violence either with or without God's approval. Interpretive challenge number 2. Number 3 is God using man who at times do his will or his own simple impulses. Another interpretive challenge is how to resolve God's sovereign will with his providential working in spite of human sin. We looked at that last week with Ehud and Eglon. Perhaps with Shamgar, it might be inferred. Very silent, but we're just inferring. Perhaps Shamgar. We already know from verse 31, Shamgar killed 600 or 700? 600 men of the Philistines with an ox goad. Let me just read chapter 4, verses 1 through 3 for you, and we'll unpack that. Again, New King James Version, chapter 4, verse 1. When Ehud was dead, the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who dwelt in Harosheth, Harosheth Hagiam. And I just killed that, didn't I? Verse 3, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord, for Jabin had 900 chariots of iron, and for 20 years he had harshly oppressed the children of Israel. Interesting. Okay, now let me premise this with the admission. I admit to you that I watch movies. I read a lot of books. I have an active imagination. And my imagination picks up where information drops off and has its knack for filling in blanks. And in that context, it is easy for me to imagine that maybe, just maybe, for the sake of argument, perhaps, only maybe, perhaps, maybe, I'm not dogmatic about this, but just maybe Ehud at some point became injured and could not personally lead his men into battle. With that thought, maybe, perhaps Shamgar, having proved himself in battle, had been elevated in rank and in power. As Ehud waned in health and power, Shamgar waxed as successor to and took place as judge in Israel. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe Shamgar rose to prominence some 2 generations after the death of Ehud, giving full circle to that cycle of nations to which we frequently refer. But Judges 4 verse 1 says, after Ehud was dead, and here we are again, Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. Right? Evil never sleeps. We know that from Jeremiah 17:9, I think. I'm sure. Jeremiah 17:9 says, the heart is desperately wicked and evil. Let me look it up. Evil never sleeps. That's my premise. That's what I'm going for here. Let's see what the Bible says. What am I looking for? Jeremiah 17:9. Hello? Oh, here it is. Okay, it says, yeah, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Clue number 1. I actually had a bookmark in there. I should have used it. Okay, evil never sleeps. Evil. Back in the 50s and 60s, I believe, there was a radio show. Maybe it was in the 40s and 50s. It says, what evil lurks in the heart of men? Only the shadow knows. Iron Maiden, let's bring it up to date. Iron Maiden did a song. The evil that men do lives on and on. Evil never sleeps. But I digress. Okay, so Ehud dies. Israel freaks out and just, spews evil all over the place. And then here we are, verse 2. And again, for the 4th time now in Israel, we're seeing what we've been reading in Judges for the 4th time now. Israel is pretty much jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire, right? It's crazy. It's ridiculous. It's secular. It's just, here we go again, like washing your hair, lather, rinse, repeat. Lather, rinse, repeat. It's crazy. Well, don't we all do that? So we can't point fingers at Israel because we're all just as stupid. That's not in my notes, but it's the truth. We're all stupid. So we can't be pointing fingers and start on this whole Israel bashing thing and, replacement theology. That's not what this is about. This is just a history study. Let's just call it for what it is. So verse 2, right? Israel jumps out of the frying pan and into the fire because here it says that the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin. Now, we visited that premise, that thought a couple weeks ago, so I won't rehash that. But I do want to look at these two people in Scripture, specifically named here in chapter 4, verse 2. We got Jabin, and then we got Sisera. Okay, let's look at them individually. Let's put our glasses on without poking ourselves in the eye. Jabin, verse 2. For those of, again, word studies, names. Jabin, the reference number in your Strong's Concordance is 2985. Go ahead and look that up. What you'll find is that Jabin means perceptive, intelligent, and or God discerning. Now, we already talked about names, right? Why this is important. If we didn't, maybe I'll edit this and put it in as a footnote. But if we did, then I don't want to repeat it. But it is worth mentioning that there's a lot of, this is very important. That's why we're doing this. Jabin means, again, perceptive, intelligent, and or God discerning. Now, Jabin, the king of the Canaanites, ruled from Hazor. I find this very interesting. Online, anyone with a computer can Google Hazor, and you can pull up articles and photos and a whole bunch of stuff on Hazor, and you can see that at an archaeological dig there in Israel, they found Hazor, and you can see the photos and you can read the history online. But basically, Hazor was a city that was located in the Upper Galilee. And I already learned a couple weeks ago that Galilee is a mountain range. Who knew, right? So Hazor is located in the Upper Galilee, north of the Sea of Galilee. So the Sea of Galilee is like a really big lake up in the mountain region of Galilee. Anyways, you already knew that. So Hazor, located in Upper Galilee, north of the Sea of Galilee, overlooking Lake Merom or whatever. Now here's the most important thing. It was the largest fortified and most important city of its day. it was a split level city, which was pretty cool. The upper section, like a split level ranch, two sections, right? High and low. The upper section was the most secured. It was the most fortified, and that was 30 acres in circumference. It was huge. And with the lower level being over 175 acres. So we're looking at, let's just say 200 acres of walled city. Pretty cool. They're saying that Hazor was made rich by trade and commerce, and it served as the capital city for the Canaanites. We know from studies prior in this series that Canaan means merchant. See what I mean? Names mean something. Now, Canaan was also the son of Ham, and Ham was the son of Noah. And we know, because we already studied this, when after the flood, Ham pretty much dissed his old man, so he pretty much got, I wouldn't say a curse or maybe it was, a connotation or a prophecy against and not for. Ham dissed his dad, so Noah pretty much made a pronunciation against Ham's son, turning out to be Canaan. And it's interesting. I think it's I'm probably misquoting, but I think it's Genesis 9:25. We can look that up. We already talked about in studies prior, so if you've been with us, you already know this. Okay. Anywho, Hazor was the capital city of the Canaanites, and they did pretty good for themselves. In spite of the curse, in spite of the prophecy against them, and in spite of the connotation of evil, or not evil, but of foreboding at least, they did pretty well for themselves, because Hazor was a happening place in its day. They made a good buck by merchandising, trading, buying and selling, and they made a profit. So Hazor is the capital of Canaan. Now, here's what I find interesting. Okay, Jabin, the king of Jabin. I'm going to have to bring out my Bible again because this is good stuff. Here in Judges chapter 4, I think we saw verse 2, Jabin specifically mentioned as the king. Yeah, verse 2. Jabin was mentioned as the king of Canaan. Now, to the Bible students in watching today, this name should ring a bell. Because back in Joshua chapter 11, I'm going to turn there quickly. Joshua chapter 11. I'm just going to read verse 1 and 2, and then we'll chew on that for, verses 1 and 10. And then we'll chew on that for a little bit. Okay, Joshua 11:1 says, "And it came to pass when Jabin, king of Hazor, heard these things, that he sent to Joab, king of Madon, to the king of Shimron, and the king of Ashur." Okay, so he's forming a coalition, right? He's getting a bunch of allies together. Now, verse 10 says, "Joshua turned back at that time and took Hazor, and struck its king with a sword, for Hazor was formerly the head of all those kingdoms." There you go. Hazor is the capital of the Canaanites. All these other people that he's calling together, they're all basically Canaanites. So Hazor is the capital. Joshua chapter 11, what just happened? Verse 10, okay, so the king, Jabin, gets killed, and the city's ransacked. It's burnt. It's destroyed. So how is it now that we're in Judges chapter 4, and here we are, Hazor, the capital, king named Jabin? Interesting. It's not the same one as back in Joshua 11. Because here, it was Joshua in Joshua 11 that led the battle. It was Joshua that was the commander of the army back in the day. Not so now. Now we have Shamgar. Or not Shamgar. What's his face? Where are we? Ehud was dead. Okay, so presumably it's Shamgar. That's what? 120 years, 160 years later, down the road, same city, Hazor, same location historically and geographically, it's the same city. It's been rebuilt. evil never sleeps. It was a different king with the same name. Interesting. The name means perceptive, intelligent, and or God discerneth. So you got these kings that eventually rose to power and ruled over Canaan, the Canaanites, and they were smart, they were perceptive, they were intelligent, they presumably, they probably rose to power by intrigue or by conspiracy, because we looked at last week, we don't know if Jabin was left-handed. Ring a bell? Anyways, and we know that, don't get me going on today's politics, because there's an interesting rabbit trail, but just the thought that we're 120, 160 years removed, same city, different king, same name. Now, again, it's very interesting, because if you like doing Bible study, and I know I do, this is interesting because in Psalms chapter 83, David writes in verse 9, and he says, and I'm going to quote, it says, this is a prayer to frustrate the conspiracy against Israel. Okay? And verse 9 says, deal with them as with Midian, as with Sisera. We're going to come back and look at him in a couple of seconds. So deal with them as with Midian, as with Sisera, as with Jabin at the brook Kishon. All mentioned in the same breath, but they're three different, separate, and unique battles, military campaigns, three different time periods, three different people. Although Sisera is the commander of Jabin's army, this is not the same Jabin. Interesting. If you look at that, oh my goodness. I only throw that in there now because there might be, if there's anyone watching, there might be one or two of you that like to do word studies and Bible studies and research. When I did this, it was like, wow, the Bible is rich. It is full with a lot of good stuff. Yeah, I said stuff in the Bible. I hope I don't go to hell for that. But what I really want to bring out here is that evil never sleeps. Hazor had been destroyed some 100. Okay, let's broaden the brushstroke here. Maybe anywhere between 80 years to 160 years, somewhere in that time frame, Hazor was rebuilt. And again, the king is reigning from Hazor. Weren't the Israelites commanded to destroy the Canaanites? Weren't they commanded to, at the very least, kick them out of their land? Because didn't God say, if they dwell among you, they're going to lead you astray? Didn't we already see that in Deuteronomy chapter 6 and 7? And aren't we seeing here in already the first 4 chapters of Judges, there was a reason God gave all these commands. It's not so much because he hated, the Canaanites. God is love. I mean, he loves everybody. We're all God's children. However, we don't always... Jesus himself said, he identified, he said, he was talking to the religious people of his day. He says, Satan is your father. He was talking to the Pharisees and saying, the father of all lies. You're a liar, and you worship Satan, the father of all lies. And we already know that there's... Okay, rabbit trail, let's not even go there. But the premise is, Israel was commanded to destroy these people, and they didn't follow the commands word for word. So here we are, some 80 to 160 years later, the Canaanites have rebuilt, regrouped, rearmed for revenge, because evil never sleeps. But I'm getting way ahead of myself. Let's look at Sisera. We're supposed to still be in verse 2, right? Judges 4 verse 2 also mentions Sisera. Now his name, the reference number to Sisera from your Strong's Concordance is 5516. Go ahead and look that up and be disappointed because it's blank. There's nothing in there for Sisera. Matter of fact, there's not a lot that we know from the Bible about Sisera at all. But one Bible commentator writes that Sisera translate as meaning meditation, battle array. His name can also mean seize a horse. Now, isn't that interesting? Because Sisera is the commander of Jabin's army. And what we know from verse 2, he pretty much lives in Hagarith, Harosheth, Hagium. We'll get back to that. Sisera means meditation or battle array or seize a horse. Now, Sisera, a very interesting fellow that we can glean from little bits here in the Bible, and also from extra biblical sources. I think it's very interesting that his name means battle array. He was given his name at birth. How did they know? His name means seize a horse. He's commanding an army of over 900 chariots. Now, the thing that is interesting about iron chariots in this day, in this time period, for this guy specifically, iron chariots were 3-horse driven. We know from history, we know from geology and archaeology, well, we just know. Basically, you got different types of chariots. You got the ones that are 1 horse, 2 horse, 3 horses, and then you got your covered wagons with 4 and 8 horses and blah, blah, blah. The point is, Sisera means battle array. Sisera means seize a horse. And here we find Sisera is the commander of Jabin's army. And we know that, we just saw in verse 2, there's 900 chariots. At an archaeological dig site, at Harosheth Hagium, of all places, they found chariot linchpins declaring Sisera as God. Now, a chariot linchpin is like a cotter pin that holds on. It's just a 1-pin system that holds on the wheel. If your chariot breaks the wheel, it's very easy to replace. You take 1 pin out that holds it in place, take the wheel off, put it back on, put that 1 pin back in. A linchpin holding on the wheel, they found at this archaeological dig site with inscription on these linchpins that simply declares, it boldly states that Sisera, I'm pronouncing his name wrong, but it means what the linchpins declared. It says Sisera is God. Wow. Sisera, well, let me share this with you. I found this on JewishEncyclopedia.com. And it says there, according, and I quote, JewishEncyclopedia.com says, and I quote, according to the Midrash, Sisera hitherto had conquered every country against which he had fought. His voice was so strong that when he called loudly, when he yelled, when he shouted, the most solid walls would shake, and the wildest animals would fall dead. Deborah, the Midrash goes on to say, was the only person that could withstand his voice, and from whom she did not flee. Sisera, according to the Midrash, Sisera caught fish enough in his beard when bathing in the Kishon to provision his whole army. According to the same source, again it was the Midrash, so according to the Midrash, 31 kings followed Sisera merely for the opportunity of drinking or otherwise using the waters of Israel. The descendants of Sisera, according to this source, says that his descendants were teachers of the young in Jerusalem. Sisera was a god. Linchpins all said that Sisera was a god. We don't know for a fact that Sisera was one of the giants that Israel conquered and killed and pretty much wiped out. But Sisera was a bad dude. You think Shamgar was bad? I mean, did I pronounce his name right? I'm killing names today. Shamgar killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad. Sisera was no pushover either. They found human skeletal remains of giants. Some 13, 15, 17, 19, 21 feet tall these guys were. And there's skeletons, there's archaeological proof that giants existed. Was Sisera a giant? I don't know. All I know is according to his JewishEncyclopedia.com. They found, no, it wasn't according to that. No, it was right here at some archaeological dig site that you could probably, I don't know where it was. Just Google it, okay? But the point is, we don't know if he was a giant, but I'm assuming he was because he had a really loud voice. The linchpins declared him as God, and you don't just give people the status of being a commander of an army just because, you know, he was a good dresser or whatever. Shamgar presumably rose to power because he was tried and true in battle. He killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad. King David didn't become anointed. Well, the long and short of it, he was anointed king before the fact, but he was really recognized, and that's when the nation loved him and hailed him as a king after he slayed a giant, after he proved himself in battle. So Sisera, I am sure, was not a pushover. Extra biblical sources says he would just to shout, and you know the thickest walls would shake, and so on and so forth. Linchpins declared him as God. So here in Judges chapter 4, verse 2, we gotta slow down, read this, do a word study, do a research. You know, I'm just going to read it again. So the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, this king of Canaan, and his commander of his army was Sisera. He was a big bad dude. Okay? Now, the thing about Sisera is he lived in Harosheth-Haggoyim. Now, we know Jabin lived in that other place, right? Hazar, it was the capital. They made their money by merchants. I killed the language. Harosheth-Haggoyim was pretty much known for its industry. I'll share with you why I say that. www.abiram/publications.com. So online, there's a site called Abiram Publications, who had a very interesting article and a study in entomology and the name and the origin of this city, Harosheth-Haggoyim, and the name itself means the carving of the nations. Harosheth-Haggoyim means also the silence of the Gentiles. Put the two together, you do the math. It says a lot. It says a mouthful right there. Harosheth-Haggoyim means the carving of the nations, the silence of the Gentiles, and if you do a word study with Ehud, his name meant united. So during this whole time before Shamgar rose to power, it's likely, it's logical to presume that not only did Ehud unite Israel, I believe, and we can prove it from Scripture because time and time again we see this to be true, that they married into, they became part of, they assimilated, they all became one. That I only say that to say this, that Ehud, meaning united not only the Israeli to Israeli, but he united Israel with the Canaanites, with the Ammonites, with the Parasites, with the whatever goes on and on. But so during this time that Ehud reigned, it's easy to see that Israel was at peace with the land, and not because, well, I'm losing my track of thought. Let me just go on with what I see here in Harosheth-Haggoyim in the Hebrew dialect. It meant, and again, there's a lot of power in the words. Hebrew meaning for Harosheth-Haggoyim means the smithy of the nations, industry. This is the place that built all the iron chariots. This is the place that built all the implements of war, the helmets, the breastplates, the what do you call those catapults, all the implements of war of the day, and stuff to provide for the commerce end of civilization too. They were the smithy of the nations. They They made stuff. Interesting. Now, Harosheth-Haggoyim is located in the northwest corner of the Jezreel Valley. It's on the Kishon River. It's in the foothills overlooking the valley, the Jezreel Valley, much in the same way as Megiddo did. Now, Megiddo, for your Bible students, you know what this is, but the city of Megiddo is some 16 miles. If you want to look on the map, you'll find Harosheth-Haggoyim by first finding Megiddo. And it's right on the edges of the Jezreel Valley, in the foothills. You go up 16 miles northwest of Megiddo, put a pin in the map, and you'll hit Harosheth-Haggoyim. Now, the same city, Harosheth-Haggoyim, and I'm pronouncing it wrong, I'm sure, is some maybe 30 to 50 miles southwest of Hazor. So if you find Hazor on the map, you come down to the south and to the west some 30 to 50 miles. Look for the mountain range just on the Kishon Valley, coming on the Kishon River, coming into the Jezreel Valley. There you go. There you can find Harosheth-Haggoyim, and I hope that's the last time I have to say that name. But it's very interesting. You can go online and you can find photos of all these places on openbible.info, www.openbible.info, and you can see the views that they had in Megiddo and Harosheth-Haggoyim. Said it again, didn't I? They talk about a room with a view. Awesome. Okay, but they were real cities, real people, in a real time. And then in verse 3. Judges 4, verse 3. And the children of Israel cried out to the Lord, for Jabin had 900 chariots of iron, and for 20 years he had harshly oppressed the children of Israel. That's New King James, harshly. King James says, mightily oppressed the children of Israel. History shows that this oppression this time, it was severe. They used brutal tactics with extreme prejudice. The subjugation that they forced Israel to was subhuman. Look at ISIS today. If you want to get an idea of what harshly or mightily oppression looks like, look at ISIS. And you'll know what Israel was going through. For 20 years, they were subjugated. They were hunted down. They were beheaded. It was not good. You go back and you do your history. Or if you don't want to, if you're too lazy, just turn on the news, look at the news of what ISIS is doing this very day, and you'll have an idea of why Israel was crying out to the Lord, because they were harshly oppressed. They were mightily oppressed. It was not a pretty picture. So for 20 years, these very same Canaanites that some like I said, from 80 to 160 years ago, that Joshua came in and destroyed Hazor, and they were supposed to take care of it back then, but they didn't. Let's parlay this to modern day time frame so you can better understand. Look at Saudi Arabia. Look at Egypt. Look at what they have in their preschool and their kindergarten and their grammar school, their elementary schools, all the way up to the time of college, what they're preaching, what they're instilling, what they're teaching their children about Israel. They're saying that, kill them. Basically, a good Jew is a dead Jew, according to textbooks in Egypt, textbooks in Saudi Arabia. You got all these nations aligning themselves against Israel, and for years and years and years, this doctrine of demons, this ideology of hate is taught in their schools. I mean, you look at Egypt, they hate Israel because they remember Moses. They remember the 10 plagues. They remember, the Red Sea. Fear is at the heart of their hatred. The same back now. And what we're reading in Judges chapter 4, verses 1 and 3 already, we see that basically it's the fear of Israel that drives their hatred. Basically, That's what we're seeing here. That's just a thumbnail sketch, because some 80 to 160 years ago, Joshua came in, killed the first king Jabin, and destroyed the city. So Israel dropped the ball, and they didn't drive them out of the land. So slowly, bit by bit, because evil never sleeps, they rebuilt, they regrouped, they reorganized, all for revenge. So Ehud dies. Why did he up and die on us there in chapter 4, verse 1? Ehud's dead. Okay, here's our chance. So, what's his name? Jabin gives the order, and the oppression begins. Maybe it was Ehud died, and then Shamgar, who rose to power. Maybe, because it's very silent. First we see Shamgar is in the end of chapter 3. Chapter 3, verse 31, it says, and then Shamgar ruled. Shamgar judged Israel. Shamgar delivered. And then chapter 4, verse 1, it says Ehud was dead. So that's why I'm thinking that first it was Ehud. Presumably he got hurt in battle. Presumably he might even came down with diphtheria, or maybe, I don't know. It's silent, but somehow he gets weaker. And then maybe Shamgar comes to power in the same time period, in the same, maybe Shamgar was to Ehud as, what's his name, Sisera is for Jabin, perhaps. All I know, in chapter 4, verse 1, Ehud's dead, and then we see the oppression begins. So presumably Ehud, who again his name means united, he kept Israel from the wholesale dismissal of faith in God, but the intent was always there, because evil never sleeps. We've been looking at time and time again, when the one judge dies, the next generation comes up, they act worse than the generations before them, because as things go, we never learn. One thing we learn from history is that we learn nothing at all. Israel is pretty much putting that on display for us in the book of Judges. We're just now getting into Judges chapter 4. So Ehud means united. So maybe, presumably, for this 80 to 160 years of peace, the Canaanites don't forget nothing, and they rebuild. Just like that's what Islam does. Just study the history of Islam. If they can't beat you, they'll form a peace with you, an uneasy peace, a false peace, only so they can rearm and regroup and rebuild. Look at Israel's war last year with all these nations coming against Israel right now. They're using the PLO and the Palestinians, whatever. That's we could talk about that later. But for now, Judges chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. The Canaanites licked their wounds and nursed their hatreds, loathing the lack of influence that they once had, inspiring and educating hatred in their children, like Islam today. Again, I say, evil never sleeps. It lies at the heart of man. It's in the church. It's everywhere. It's prevalent. The only place that evil is absent is in the Spirit. The Bible says to walk in the Spirit, and you won't fulfill the lust of the flesh, the desires of your heart. And we know that the heart is desperately wicked. Evil never sleeps. Christians aren't perfect. The church, not even close. I don't think they even care. Evil never sleeps. It never takes a day off. And when it is silenced, it never rests. It charms, it seduces, it propagates, and demonstrates the propensity within ourselves, and eventually, once again, it dominates, it subjugates, it annihilates. It's a vicious cycle. That's what we're seeing here in the book of Judges. First, and again, I remind you of the cycle of the nations. It's at the heart of it's the hub of the wheel that just goes round and round and round. We're going to be, we're not going anywhere. We're just spinning our wheels and going nowhere. It's now in verse 4 of Judges chapter 4, we're going to see Deborah, a prophetess and the wife of Lapidoth. We're going to open up there next week. I just want to, I want to apologize for the last time we looked at Judges chapter 3, verses 12 through 30, and I dropped the ball. I don't even think I did very well picking it up here in verse 31 and carrying over into chapter 4. But I do want to say that at the very least, our study in the book of Judges is proving to be very interesting. And it pains me to no end that there's a large, dare I say, the majority of Christians today think that, we're replacing Israel. Replacement theology, that, and a large, oh my goodness, how many people in calling themselves Christians today are signing boycotts against Israel? We're aligning ourselves with the enemies of God in the name of religion. Again, nothing new, because evil never sleeps. And it's allowed to repeat. It's allowed to, just perpetuate, because we, you and I, refuse to educate ourselves. Refuse to believe that truth is subjective. There is truth. There is an ultimate truth. Jesus identifies it for us in chapter 17 of John. It says, Jesus is praying for us, by the way. John chapter 17. It's not in my notes, but I remind you to look at that. Jesus is praying for you. Jesus is praying for me. And in that prayer, he identifies truth. Truth is subjective. It's not relative. Truth is subjective. Sanctify them by thy truth. Jesus himself prayed. Thy word is truth. What I'm holding in my hand. What we're not reading at wholesale. The church, we'll just hold up our Bible and say, I, me, gimme, but when it comes to opening it and studying it, we'll throw it right back down on the chair or on the coffee table, and dust flies everywhere. People, even if you're not a Christian, I invite you to please just study. As the Bible says, study to show thyself approved, a workman who needeth not to be ashamed. The church has got egg all over their face because they're either teaching false doctrine in spite of the truth that we hold in our hands. We'll twist and we'll bend and we'll read with a pair of scissors and a can of Elmer's glue, which we're snipping in between, hymns. Amazing Grace, snip the glue and then go to. I don't apologize. I'm just calling it like I see it. And I think we can learn a lot by reading this book of Judges. My point is there's a lot that we need to learn, because we're repeating the same exact thing that Israel did back in Judges. The church is as guilty, if not more. And we really need a Shamgar for today. We really need a Deborah. And we're going to look at her next week. What we really need is the presence of the Almighty God by virtue of the Holy Spirit that indwells us when we believe and receive the promise. And it's interwoven from the Old to the New Testament. This is a promise. We talked about that weeks prior. There's a promise in there for you, and if you don't have it, whose fault is it? God gave you the promise. You have to receive. But that's a story for another day. I probably strayed way off my intended purpose for today, but I'm already out of time, so I can't fix it now. You're stuck with it, and we're reading the book of Judges for a purpose. And we'll continue it. We'll pick it up in Judges chapter 4, verse 4 next time we get together. I hope you come back. Hope I didn't scare you away. In the meantime, have a great day.